Dark and the Wicked is a 2020 American supernatural horror movie written and directed by Brian Bertino. It stars Marin Ireland, Michael Abbott Jr., and Xander Berkeley.
Happening, folks, and welcome to the channel. Some people thought The Dark and the Wicked was fantastically relentless and brutal, while other people thought it was an obvious metaphor with an underwhelming ending. Let's take a look at the plot and we will see how dark and wicked The Dark and Wicked actually is.
The movie opens on a farm in Texas where an older couple appear to be struggling. The father's bedridden and a mysterious illness has robbed him of his ability to communicate. The mother looks exhausted and seems spooked by her surroundings. Against their mother's wishes, her children, Louise and Michael, come back to help out in any way they can. That night when they sit down to dinner, their mother screams at them for coming and tells them to leave. Assuming it's just the stress of having to look after her husband and the farm all by herself, they take her outburst as a sign she really does need help, so they stay. And if I was there for dinner, I'd have been all like,
"Thanks for inviting me over, Mrs. Straker." Would you guys believe this is my first time at a real farm? It's lovely. Is this particular farm a special kind of farm, or do they all smell like God's shit everywhere?
The food was good tonight.
It certainly was. You have a real way with chicken, Mrs. Straker. I should get the recipe from you. I bet my mom would love this. She has a real thing for cow shit.
I'm supposed to be, you both know it.
Very rustic.
And that night, after they've all gone to bed, Mother goes into the kitchen and cuts all of her fingers up into tiny pieces before she hangs herself from the rafters in the barn. In the following days, Louise and Michael get friendly with their father's nurse, and she tells them their mother was talking to somebody that wasn't there for the last few months. Michael sticks around to look after the farm, and Louise gets the nurse to show her how to look after her father overnight until they figure out what to do going forward. And as soon as they agree to stay, things start going bonkers. Michael finds their mother's diary in which she expresses her fear of an unnamed presence who's trying to take her husband's soul. And after their mother's burial, a priest named Father Thorne, played chillingly by Xander Berkeley, swings around to the house to speak to Louise and Michael. They're convinced the priest must have been the one to put all these ideas in their mother's head, given they found a dozen crucifixes in her pocket and she wasn't a religious woman. The visit doesn't last long and the priest leaves his phone number behind. A few hours later, he returns to the farm and beckons them to come outside before completely vanishing in front of both of them. And while that's happening, a ranch hand named Charlie, who was helping around the farm, sees Louise in his RV, and the terrifying apparition coaxes him into finishing himself off with his own gun. When Louise can't get Charlie on the phone, she calls the priest to ask why he came to the farm the previous night, but the priest tells her he lives in Chicago and he's never even been to Texas. Running out of options and fearing they're both losing their minds, they call a doctor to advise them about putting their dad into a hospital, but the doctor tells him he's gonna go at any minute and the trip to the hospital would probably finish him off. Next morning, they find all the goats have been torn to pieces out in the field, so they burn the remains, but they can't figure out how to prevent the death of the remaining animals. That night, while Michael's wrapping up in the barn, his mother comes at him, completely naked and mumbling Christian hymns. Then she whispers "cut" into his ear, and he barely stops himself from doing it. And while Michael's dealing with that, Louise has a nightmare while she's sleeping next to her dad. When she wakes up from it, she finds Michael has left. Then Charlie, the farmhand's granddaughter, knocks on the door to tell her he ended his life 2 days ago. And as soon as Louise invites the young girl in, her demeanor shifts, and she says some seriously creepy shit from behind a brilliant grin. By the time Louise figures out it's the entity, it disappears as quickly as it came. A few minutes later, the nurse arrives and finds Louise in a state as she's found out Michael's left her alone and gone home. While Louise is crying on the phone, the nurse gets taken over. She tries fighting it off, but she's not strong enough, so she takes a pair of knitting needles to herself before she attacks Louise. Then she blinds herself as she praises Jesus. Then she drops dead. When Michael gets home, he finds his wife and 2 young daughters dead at the kitchen table in what looks like a murder-suicide. The sight puts Michael over the edge, so he takes his knife to his own throat, only to realize it was all a trick, as his wife and children walk in the door as he's bleeding out on the floor. Back at the farm, Louise comes to and realizes her father's dying. The entity impersonates Michael from outside to try and pull her away from her father's side as he's passing, but she doesn't fall for it. And after her father passes, the sound of her mother singing to her distracts her just long enough for the demon to pounce on her from the side.
And there you have it, folks, the plot to The Dark and the Wicked. Let's start out with the good bits.
This movie is dense with dread, and that happens to be my favorite thing in horror movies. Director Brian Bertino used every tool in his filmmaking toolbox to make you feel dreadful. I often talk about score and its importance to horror movie atmospheres. This movie makes great use of sound and silence in perfect balance. There's wind, and there's creaking doors and floorboards, and voices you might have just heard off in the distance, but maybe you didn't. Often, on a similar note, when movie critics reference cinematography, you usually imagine grandiose Sound of Music style swooping shots of mountain ranges and lakes of the deepest blue. But effective cinematography is meant to convey the story world to the extent you're immersed in it, no matter what the story world looks like. This movie's full of muted, nearly dead shades of brown and beige. There's no direct sunshine. You don't even get flashes of green from the grass. Nobody's wearing vibrant colored clothing. And with the occasional exception of a few well-placed red splashes, there's no color inside the house either. And also, something I'm a huge fan of, every character was authentic in their appearances. They looked worn out and tired and dirty, like any normal human being would be in this kind of an unimaginable situation. Combine the score and the cinematography and the performances from these actors and a very desolate plot, you end up with a very heavy, relentless, unsettling, hopeless atmosphere that doesn't take its hands off your throat the entire runtime. And as far as this horror fan is concerned, I thought it was fucking brilliant. Having said that, everything I've just said about this movie's tone is what makes me love it, but it's probably going to be too much for a lot of people. I wasn't exaggerating when I said it never lets up, and it's a rare thing for modern horror directors to allow an entire movie to remain truly bleak without occasional moments of respite or levity. David Fincher did it in 1995 with Seven. Ari Aster did it in 2018 with Hereditary. If you pay close attention to a lot of the seemingly dreadful movies, most of them have their own versions of a happy ending, twisted as they may be. In 2019's Midsommar, nobody survived, but Danny closes the film with a big satisfied grin on her face. Even in Pascal Laugier's Martyrs in 2008, which some people label one of the most brutal films ever made. The movie ends successfully by its own set of rules with the possible confirmation of an afterlife. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I'm getting a little bit jaded. And as with anything in life we turn to for pleasure, over time you start needing more and more of it to reach those old initial highs again. And I'm as guilty as anyone for chasing the horror movie dragon. That may very well explain these grim, forlorn stories about forsaken, doomed individuals resonating with me so much more than a typical Conjuring film, but for now, I'd prefer to savor the feeling while it's here, instead of analyzing it to death, because we all know there is certainly no shortage of shitty movies I can do that with. So, should you watch The Dark and the Wicked if you haven't seen it yet? Or should you be a total dick and listen to your mother when she tells you not to come up to the farm?
If you're not into unrelenting darkness and inescapable tragedy, you might want to give this one a miss. But if you like hopelessness and sealed fates in your horror movies, The Dark and the Wicked will absolutely leave you feeling completely destroyed, in the best way possible. As always, thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on whatever the hell I end up doing next week. And until next time, folks,